I have to say that I'm very excited to be starting this call with my friends from all over the world, a group of adult survivors of sibling sexual abuse who have been very brave, I think, to step out into the world and share their stories of sibling sexual abuse and also how it has impacted their lives. And all of us are in some way being activists and advocates for changing society's understanding of sibling sexual abuse. So let's just start really quickly now. I'd like each of you just to take a moment to introduce yourselves to the audience. And Gloria, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you. My name's Gloria Masters. I'm a survivor of sibling sexual abuse, among other things, and I run the charity called Handing the Shame Back, and this is a place for survivors to come and share what they're comfortable to about their journeys and get some resource and support. I've also written a couple of books.
That's great. Thank you, Gloria. And you're in lovely New Zealand, aren't you?
Yes, I am. It's 8:30 in the morning here.
Yeah, it's when you're doing a call like this with this wide range of people, there's a lovely big clock that is covering the whole earth. So thank you for that. Thank you for your introduction as well. Liz.
Hi, I'm Liz Robert. I'm a survivor of sibling sexual abuse. I was abused by my brother, who was 8 years older than me when I was 8 years old. And I've only recently sort of stepped forward and come into the light and started to share my story. And in that short space of time, I've seen how powerful it is for me as a survivor, but also the impact it's had on friends, family, and the wider population. So I'm really pleased to be here. I'm speaking from the UK. It's 9 o'clock at night, but it feels like 9 o'clock in the morning.
It's great to have you here, Liz. Thank you very much. And Jane.
My name is Jane Epstein, and I am a survivor of sibling sexual abuse and trauma. First of all, thank you, Nancy, for providing this special day. Thank you for sharing your platform to raise awareness, because I think that so many survivors have felt alone and isolated for so long. And I think it's very powerful to bring this group of strong individuals together. And I am here to just continue to raise awareness, and hopefully we can normalize the discussion around this and remove the taboo from it and give survivors hope, and also hopefully reach some parents and they'll understand that, no, this really is real. It is happening, and it is very traumatic and very damaging.
Thank you, Jane. It's great to have you here. Carol.
Hi, Nancy. Hi, everyone. I'm Carol Brooks, and I'm a survivor of sibling sexual abuse. And I believe passionately that the awful thing of sibling sexual abuse cannot happen in the light. It can only happen in the dark. And I think the more we talk about it, the more we expose it, the less likely it is to happen. And I don't think I said I'm in Devon in England.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. And Phil.
Hi, I'm Phil Goldstein. I'm really glad to be here with all of you. I too am a survivor of sibling sexual abuse, and I'm in Washington, D.C. I'm an author, a published poet, and I've written a book of poetry about my experience called How to Bury a Boy at Sea. And I'm here to provide the male perspective, which I think is very often lacking in these conversations, and to just, I guess, we can get more into this, but remind parents that even if you're in a household where you only have boys, that doesn't mean that sibling sexual abuse can't happen. It can happen in any kind of home, in any configuration. So that's a message that I definitely want to get across to parents.
It's an important message too, and I thank you for being here to share that message, and for again contributing the male perspective to this subject, because it is so often thought to be, females as being the victims of sexual abuse, or the dynamic of the family. If there's boys, there's no abuse, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you for being here. And last but certainly not least, Maria.
Hi, Nancy. Thank you for having me and for hosting this. I'm Maria Sokoloff. I am I live in New York. I'm in Massachusetts at the moment. I am a survivor of sibling sexual trauma and abuse, and I've written my memoir that came out 3 years ago. And yeah, I'm here just to speak out and to get the word out and to help prevent this by speaking out and, and showing what it's really like for those of us who've lived it. And the breadth of that experience across all of us is so wide that I'm glad we have several representatives here to try to get at that.
That's great. Thank you. And I take a different role on this call than I do on all the other calls in the SiblingsToo Day. I am a contributor as an adult survivor myself of sibling sexual abuse. And while I am facilitating the conversation in other parts of this event, I've tried to take a back seat as I have professionals and academics and other experts, lived experience advisors and stuff like that on the calls. But in this particular call, I'm going to be contributing as well, just as an adult survivor of sibling sexual abuse. So welcome everybody and thank you for being here. It's an important call, this one. And I think it's one that we can share with the audience, adult survivors for sure, but the parents and others in the community who are not that familiar with sibling sexual abuse, and try and reinforce some of the messaging about this type of abuse that nobody really wants to talk about. So we're here to talk about it. And where I want to start with our conversation is, in other parts of the Awareness Day, we've been talking about, some of the ways to prevent sibling sexual abuse, some of the contributing factors, myths and misinformation, and all that, with professionals, academics, and lived experience people on the same call, which is great. But we are the ones, this group here, who've lived through it. Every single one of us, in different ways, have lived through sibling sexual abuse. So we can speak very directly to certain things. One of which is, what sort of family environment did you have as a child that either contributed to, I wouldn't say cause, but contributed to or impacted the likelihood or even the events of sibling sexual abuse? I know I can remember some of that environment, not all of it, because I was about 8 when it first started. So I don't remember everything. And it is difficult as an adult sometimes to look back with an adult brain to a child's brain. But I think each one of us can give some insight into, what did the household look like? What did your household look like that in some way may have contributed to or been a reason why sibling sexual abuse occurred and continued for a period of time? So I'm just going to quickly go around the room and then we'll open the conversation up a little bit more. But Carol, would you mind if I started with you on that?
Sure. So my mother died, and my father introduced an outsider into our home, and she arrived to look after us with her son. And the leverage that he used to abuse me was grooming emotional blackmail, that if I ever told, then his mum would leave and I would lose another mother figure, and the family would all be disrupted again, and it would all be my fault. And that was enough to silence me. But more importantly, I think it's really important to say that I was, yes, I was afraid of the sexual abuse, but I was probably more afraid of the secret coming out and of the reality of what he predicted actually coming true. So I spent a lot of my time being afraid of going home, because it would happen anytime, any room, whenever he got the opportunity, whether it was a full house or an empty house. But I also spent a lot of my time fearing that the secret would come out. So I went to a lot of trouble to cover up for him, to make sure that that never happened, because I could not bear the idea of the family being disrupted. And he even said, and if I told my father would have a heart attack and he would die. And I knew exactly what it felt like to lose a parent. So I was petrified of that. So the fear of the secret coming out was in fact worse of the fear of the abuse. So the real I think it was a power that he had over me, and I think there's some dysfunction that was there, even though it didn't feel like dysfunction at the time.
Right.
I think with hindsight it was.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think most of us will understand that you're talking about there is not only the fear, because I think we can all attest to that at some level, but it's the power. It's so often stated that inadvertently households can give power to the older children over the younger children, whether it's the offhanded, Bob, you're going to babysit your younger sister or something like that, and little Jane, you better listen to what your older brother is saying while he's babysitting you, sort of stuff, and we can inadvertently create that power, which exacerbates that fear as well, right? So and vice versa. So would you all agree with that they're quite often part of the environment going on in the family is something has happened that creates a power thing, Phil?
Yeah, I think that, whenever you have abuse, there's always a power dynamic. I mean, for me personally, it was, that I was 4.5 years younger than my older brother. And, my parents left us alone a lot. Whenever they were going out, if you got a 10-year-old and a 15-year-old, then, you feel like, oh, the 15-year-old can watch the 10-year-old while I run out to the store or wherever. And, he was not just bigger than me and stronger than me, but, was kind of my caretaker. And I was dependent on him and obviously on my family as a child. So I think that, that power dynamic is definitely there. And then, it becomes an abuse of power, and it becomes kind of an issue of kind of opportunity, mostly.
And Maria, I think you were gonna make a comment.
You're reading my mind. I didn't get it. So I'm kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of it. It's really hard to even figure out if there was some dysfunction. I'm sure obviously there was, but in my case, it was a one-time event, and so there wasn't grooming and all this going on, and it didn't continue. In my case, my brother had been abused outside of the house, and I can look, and I worked with psychologists and tried to figure out what was the environment in the house that made me not say anything. So I know when it happened, I froze, and I think that power dynamic is, yes, he was older, my older brother, not by that much, but he was my older brother. And so I froze. And then I think I tried to tell my parents through just a note, and ask them, if I could sleep with my mom that night. I don't remember this. It's evidence from some notes that my parents found later. So what made me not, then I repressed it for 32 years. So something was traumatic enough for me when I didn't get the response from them that I wanted. I think I believed they didn't either believe me or wouldn't support me. And in the child's mind thinks, like Phil said, I need my family to survive. And, I can't risk that not happening. So I just put it out of my mind for all that time. So I don't, my parents were together. It was all biological family, same biological family. And sure, maybe my parents were distracted. They were both working hard and who knows what else, but it wasn't a truly dysfunctional family. I don't see it as that way, but something happened that then my brother acted out on me. And then for whatever reason, I didn't feel like I was heard, and it went underground until I was an adult. And now, and I've held that in my body this whole time, and the consequences have continued as I'm 57 years old now. So even from that one event, but yeah, so it's hard to say.
The family environment, I think, one of the things, even before I started this particular project myself, was the term dysfunction when it comes to a family. And I've worked in psychology for many years, and I would have to say that all families are dysfunctional in some way or another. And it's what we know to be true, and I know you guys all know this, but it's that idea of open and honest communication within a family And also, Gloria, perhaps you can speak more to this idea of having conversations in the family about any subject without bringing in concepts of shame. Because one of the things that keeps people quiet, whether it's an adult or a child, is their sense of shame. But if a child can go into a family conversation and say anything without being completely dismissed, you know, or somebody saying, oh, you shouldn't be talking about stuff like that, and these sorts of things, then it's more likely that the family can have conversations about anything. And I know, Gloria, you talk a lot about shame in the work that you do with your podcast, and I know it's in the context of child abuse, but the psychology of shame will keep people quiet for a very long time.
Yeah, and I think where, you know, secrecy and silence and shame exist, which is all hallmarks of sibling sexual abuse, shame will always take the gold. And partly, I think, because it's unspoken, it's unpalatable, and for children who perhaps have experienced this, it's almost impossible for them to find their voices. So listening to Maria, it's more likely that a child won't speak than that a child will. And, you know, in terms of also what the narrative is in the family, and I'm sure you'll all relate to this. So the narrative is what is allowed outside. It is what is allowed to be released. And I think as children and family members, we all carry it. And therefore, if it's unpalatable and it's not suiting what the family unspoken have agreed on, then it's even more unlikely to ever find a home. I will say this, though, that in my case, where neglect and abandonment exist, abuse will always find a home, and it certainly did in mine. So, yeah.
Yeah, sort of the neglect and disregard for the little creatures running around the house. It creates that vacuum for forms of abuse to come in, right? And for sure. So there's certainly more likelihood of sibling sexual abuse occurring in families where there's neglect, domestic violence. You know, children, particularly an older child, will sometimes want to comfort themselves by getting closer to the other siblings because they share the trauma of parental dysfunction and all that sort of stuff. But you are right, when there's neglect and stuff, it can create a vacuum. Yet at the same time, we also know, like in my family, there was not any sort of what one would say obvious form of dysfunction. That the neighbors, I really like what you were saying though about what will go out into the world, because my family was quite protective, I think, of the messaging of who that Morris family was. But my family, in relation to the other families around us, we were all kind of the same. You know, there was nothing untoward in my family. But when you were talking about the messaging, my father in particular would have wanted to put out into this message into the world that this is a very sound family, a very, you know, quintessentially middle class, everybody's fine, 2.4 children, you know, all that sort of stuff. And that probably put a lot of pressure on us inadvertently, because, you know, now as a step parent myself, I know you don't come with a book for this sort of stuff. So you got to kind of figure it out as you go. And I know my parents' family history, and so some of it would have been very difficult for them to manage. So I can see how that was. But our family was a quintessential happy family, went to church every Sunday, you know, the kids did well in school, there was nothing untoward, which to me just reinforces that messaging that I've heard over and over again. And I know from you guys, it's every type of family, every structure of family, biological, blended, step, quote unquote dysfunctional, or not dysfunctional at all, you know, upper echelons of society, lower echelons of society, it doesn't matter, it can occur in any type of family. So it's an illusion to think it's only that family that lives on the other side of the tracks, or the ones that have a lot of difficulty going on. One of the things, though, that I think we can speak to as well, that is really important as lived experience experts, is knowing, as much as one can remember, how it felt growing up in this household where on the surface all was well, but in our own individual worlds, life was shit. You know, like there was stuff going on that was really difficult. Jane, your hand went straight up when I said life is shit, and your hand went straight up. So
I wanted to respond to a couple of things. The my life was shit. Carol and I we've shared our stories, and we have such different stories, which is why I think this is such a great panel. I didn't understand what was happening to me. I knew on some level that there was a level of shame and I was hiding it, but I didn't think that my life was shit. I didn't. And I kind of wanted to respond to the power dynamic as well. If a parent is listening to this, I want them to be mindful if they think that they don't have siblings that are far apart in age, that, oh, I'm good. We hear from survivors, you all have heard from survivors, where some survivors have been sexually abused by a younger sibling or close in age sibling. So I do want parents to understand that even if there's not a power dynamic, it can still happen. In my family, it's a unique situation. Every situation is different. I have a speaking relationship with my sibling. And my sibling was 6 years older than me, so you'd think there'd be a power dynamic. But he was actually generally a rule follower. You know, you tell him what to do, he does it. And the way the sexual abuse started with my story is my brother was 12, I was 6, and I was getting dressed in my pajamas, and he was going through all these changes, didn't have a safe place to come and ask his questions, and literally has told me, I saw you changing and I knew I needed to know more. And that's how the sexual abuse began. It started out from his perspective, curiosity, and it led to abuse because his body responded, and then his body wanted more. And then my body started responding. So I didn't think that my life was shit, but there was dysfunction in the family. I can look back and see that now, that my father didn't know what to do with the girl, and I wasn't daddy's little princess. So that made me more vulnerable to my brother's attention. My father was a school psychologist. He's out telling everybody else how great their kids are and helping all those children, but not really keeping an eye on what's going on in his own home. To the point, which Carol and I kind of share this similarity, that my father was coming down the hallway and he said, "What's all that noise going on in that room?" I opened the door. I was hiding under a blanket, and closes the door. So it kind of goes back to something I think we were talking about before you started recording. As parents, if you have an intuition and you think something may be going on, don't close that door. Talk about it.
mm-hmm. And you raise an important point, because your brother was growing up, he was going through maturation, through puberty and stuff, and he didn't have a place to go and find these things out safely. So the family environment was not safe for him either. Right. And it's a different kind of thing altogether. But that's what I sort of mean about the family environment. There was no openness to have these conversations. Now, kids don't usually go running around the house saying, "Oh, I want to talk about what's happening to my body." I mean, that's not what kids do when they're going through puberty. But I know even in my house, it was really uncomfortable. My mother was uncomfortable talking to me about girls getting older and stuff like that. So it would have been difficult for me to go back to her and have conversations that were similar, because I knew how uncomfortable she was. And I mean, I totally get it. I know when my stepdaughter was talking to me about stuff, it was like, oh my God, I really don't want to have this conversation. But you do, right? So
I hope we're getting better. I really do hope, as a society, I hope we're getting better.
Well, I would like to say the same thing. I would hope so too. And one of the things I really think that is a preventative step of sibling sexual abuse is parents learning how to have these kinds of conversations and talk about sexuality and body anatomy and all of these sorts of things when kids are tiny little things, and starting there and starting to have that conversation about you know, our bodies and whatever, body safety, and then also just about having respectful conversations. One of the things I know I've been guilty of in being a part of my stepchildren's lives is sometimes just dismissing what they're saying because I'm busy, or, you know, I'm doing stuff, and every parent on this call will go, yeah, me too, you know, like, and so we have these this way of being sometimes that is dismissive of children, for sure, in our home. And we don't think as parents that perhaps some of my behavior is contributing to my children having really negative experiences in their life. Because the other factor that's always often involved is this illusion that children won't hurt each other, they won't abuse each other, that all children are innocent, and that, you know, nobody will act out this kind of behavior. My kid might get in trouble with somebody down the street, maybe, you know, and that's really even extremely difficult for me to think of. That's usually what parents are thinking. They can't think it's going to happen in their own home. And that's another part for me of the family environment, where living by this illusion that my kids are angels, because they're not. I mean, even sibling abuse, not sexual abuse, but sibling abuse. So behavior towards your siblings that would, if it was occurring with another child outside of the house, would be considered bullying or illegal, or, you know, something else. It goes on in the house and it's sort of disregarded. You know, even that behavior creates an air in the family that it's like, oh yeah, okay, well, sexual abuse might now occur. So does anybody have any further thoughts on that? Liz?
I was listening to everyone's different stories, and I grew up in a very divisive family, but on the right side of the tracks, my dad was a senior police officer. Parents were both very strict Catholics, so our upbringing was stern. So I guess the belief from my parents was we'd be too scared to do anything. But dad was quite brutal, you know. My mum was the she would be the power, and my dad would be the enforcer, you know. It would be a real case of wait till your father gets home. And I can remember the dreaded, you know, heavy footsteps. He was a big man coming up the stairs, and you just I was a bedwetter till God knows how long. But I did what I was told, you know. I wasn't a deviant child. But I think that the thread through our family was the church. You know, we had to be seen to be this perfect Catholic family, and that was at all costs. This perfect Catholic family headed by a senior police officer. You know, that was it. So possibly that strictness led potentially maybe to rebellion from my eldest brother. I don't know. I'm not interested as to why he did what he did. I know that he knew it was wrong because of his age at the time, and we all knew it was wrong. In fact, the S word, sex, was a dirty word all my life. You know, it was just something that, it was a disgusting thing, and I was born with body shame. You know, that was the Catholic way in those days, certainly in my family. So I think that environment certainly enabled Andrew to do what he did, and it enabled him to get away with it, because the atmosphere of fear prevented me feeling safe from being able to tell anybody. To the extent that when I went down the EMDR route, we had intensive psychotherapy, and you had to come up with somebody from your past that you felt safe with, that you would go to as a child. It's upsetting me now to think about it. I was absolutely devastated when I realized there was nobody. There wasn't a teacher, there wasn't a sibling, there was nobody. Because I was a bedwetter, never had friends to sleep over, and actually, as everybody talks about trust, I didn't trust anyone either. So I kept everything inwards, and carried on doing so. So that certainly created an environment where that abuse, he got away with it. And then was rewarded by being, you know, the oldest sibling that was the head of the family when my parents' health declined, and the injustice of it was breathtaking. It really was. So yeah, that's my little contribution to the mix.
You know, I think you brought up quite a few important points that we don't want to skip over, and I certainly wouldn't want you to think that I'm sort of moving along without paying attention to them, because I think what you are introducing us to now is talking a little bit more about how these things impact us over the longer term. And you brought up one thing there, and I know before we hit the record button, Carol was talking about it as well, this idea of trust, and how not only does the abuse cause trust issues, and I don't like that word, but trust concerns for a person, but then how the family responds, whether there's disclosure or not, all the stuff that's going on in the family. So Carol, do you want to go back to talking a little bit more about the longer term impacts as it relates to trust? Because trust is such an important part of somebody's identity as they grow up. And when it's disrupted, it really has some important impacts. So Carol, could you address that?
Yeah, so it wasn't until years in therapy that I realized that I had trust issues, and that I had lived my childhood in what is termed an unsafe environment, because I never felt safe. So one day, I'd say it was a typical day. My stepbrother was abusing me, and he pitter on the stairs, and my stepmom walked in the room, and he pulled up his trousers, and I was still lying on the bed, and pulled my skirt down, and she was in the room for a few seconds, and then she walked out the room, and then she said, "Carol, come here." So she called me downstairs out the room, and she said what was going on. So first of all, I mean, my heart was pounding. I was absolutely petrified. I thought, this is it, the secret's out. Oh my God, I'm going to be in such trouble. And I thought of, very quickly, I thought of a lie so that the whole world wouldn't implode. And I said, oh, we were just wrapping your birthday present, and that's why it was all a bit weird when you walked in. And she said, are you sure? And I said, yes, absolutely. And oh, okay, off you go. Now, I thought there was no way she would accept my poor fumble excuse that I conjured up in 30 seconds. And I was absolutely convinced that when my father came home from work, she would tell our father, and the whole family would split up, and it would be suitcases packing, and it would be the cataclysm that my stepbrother had always told me it would be. And what was weird, I went to bed that night, and I could hardly sleep. My heart was still racing. I was so frightened. And what was weird, that nothing happened. And nothing happened the next day, and nothing happened the day after. And what this really, the impact of this was that, first of all, well, did she see it? Is she ignoring it? Is she not protecting me? Did she tell my father, and my father's not protecting me? So it actually opened up all these avenues of, oh my God, they might not care. They might not give a damn that he's using me sexually. And it really meant that I then felt that nobody was on my side. Nobody was there to look out for me. So in fact, she did see what she saw, and she knew exactly what was going on. I think she just managed it in her mind that, oh, it's experimentation or whatever it was. But it came out in court that she did know, and she did understand the extent of what was going on, but she just chose not to divulge it to my father because she didn't want to disrupt her life and her family. But the impact for me was that I then was unable to trust partners, friends, and it's not just the the shame that we've talked about of, you know, you're dirty or whatever. It's the fact that nobody will stand by me. So it's as if every single relationship, and particularly also in work, I felt as if I could never be myself, never be authentic. And it has taken me 30 years of therapy to learn to live what I call an authentic life, to be really who I am, because I never thought I would be believed. I never thought I would be loved. I was unlovable. Nobody could ever possibly give me a hug and love me for who I really am if they found out who I am, because clearly she must have told my father he didn't love me. I mean, etc., etc., etc. The whole thing of somebody walking in the room and seeing it, I would really just say, if there's any parents listening, the devastation of not confronting the problem there and then is far, far worse than if you think, oh, this is going to be upsetting, let's just not deal with it. 20, 30, 40 years down the road, it is even worse, because all those years of never, ever feeling safe, living in fear and never able to trust is just 30 years of codependency and inability to have functional, loving relationships. It's dysfunction forever. It's catastrophic.
And then the impacts of what that does to your mindset, even as a child, causes a line of behavior that just reinforces that. I know for myself, and Jane, you've talked about this before, you get yourself into situations that are reinforcing what you believe, and therefore you get used again by other people, and you are with people that you shouldn't be trusting. It's almost, I know for myself, I would put myself in positions where I was almost testing to see if somebody would not be a jerk, or, you know, or whatever. They never won the test, you know, it was never panned out well, but it was, you're constantly testing the world. I know for myself anyway, for those very reasons, Carol, that in different contexts, but for similar reasons to what you're talking about, I was constantly testing the world or reinforcing the storyline by doing things that would get me into trouble, or, you know, put me in a position with other people that I really shouldn't have been with at all. Anyway, it's just, you create this perpetual mouse wheel until you can find a way to get off that mouse wheel, which is usually therapy. But there's a mouse wheel. Now, Phil, you've been a very quiet man while all these women are talking, and your experience as a male survivor of sibling sexual abuse. I mean, I have no doubt that all this resonates for you, but you have a perspective that's a little bit different because you were the younger brother of an older boy who chose to sexually abuse you. So what are your thoughts?
I think that, you know, as you said, everything that everybody's been talking about resonates with me. You know, especially the shame, and you know, feeling like I can't say anything because it will, you know, destroy my family. And, you know, again, like I was saying before, that vulnerability that you feel as a child, and your unwillingness, or you know, just great fear of what it will do to your safety. I think that for me, you know, I, growing up, you know, also didn't really fully grasp what was happening, other than to feel that it was something that should be hidden. You know, I wasn't really explicitly ever coerced to not talk about it. I just kind of intuited that I shouldn't. And part of that was my family dynamic, which was, you know, my older brother had a lot of learning disabilities, behavior issues. And so I was the golden child, and I felt like I can't put this on, you know, my parents' plate. It would just be, you know, one more thing for them, and I shouldn't do that. And, you know, I think that as I grew up, this is, you know, the sort of unique male aspect of it. You know, you're going through puberty, you're into high school, you know, there's a lot of, obviously, messaging in our culture that, you know, to be a real man means to, you know, be strong and be, you know, virile and good with the ladies and confident, and, you know, uh I grew up in a relatively liberal part of New York, but even then in the late 90s and early 2000s, homosexuality was really kind of frowned upon, and disfavored. And so, nobody as a, eighth grader, ninth grader in high school, whatever, wants to say, you know, this happened to me, between me and my brother, because even if, you tell somebody in confidence, who knows where that information is going to lead. And so that's part of the fear too. And I think that honestly, looking back, it was pretty logical that I didn't say anything, even though there were lots of people in my life who, in theory, I could have told, guidance counselor or,
Mm.
a religious school teacher or, just a regular teacher. So, I think that there's still, and I think that this is much less so than it was, 25, 30 years ago. But I think that there is still a message that we need to try to dispel, that, to admit this as a man means that you're somehow less than. And I think that, it's important for other men to know that they're not alone in this.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important message to restate, that particularly with sibling sexual abuse, it does happen between brothers. It happens between sisters as well, but it does happen between brothers. And there is a different experience for young boys who are being abused by a brother or even an older sister, based on the messaging in society and in families too, about, boys need to be, as you say, those strong beings that never cry, and they need to be virile and all these other things. And those are just myths and misinformation that puts all sorts of confusing things out to little children, and I also want to sort of make a point as well, and I'm preaching to the choir here, but what we think as little children, when we try and look back on it as adults, we are kind of guessing a little bit on some things, not everything, obviously. But when I look back on when I was 8 years old, when I first spoke to a therapist about this when I was 20. I was quite fortunate. I had that opportunity at that time, if fortunate's the right word, but you know what I mean. Even that 12-year gap between when it first started and when I spoke to a therapist, I was kind of guessing what that 8-year-old was thinking. And it's also very hard to articulate, even as an adult. It's hard to articulate the thoughts and feelings of who you were as a young child. I think one of the things that's common amongst us all is we've all done a lot of work on this. We've all been to therapy, spoken to people, written memoirs, or done that kind of work that allows us to process some of this. So we perhaps have better insight. Better is the wrong word, but we have a type of insight that perhaps others do. And those others could be adult children who are becoming aware of this term sibling sexual abuse. Jane, you'll know that everybody on this call actually will know this, that recently there's all of a sudden all these people starting to come forward saying, this happened to me, this happened to me. I didn't have this language before. I'd never heard of sibling sexual abuse. I'd heard of incest, or I'd heard of this kind of abuse, but I didn't see myself in that conversation. Now I do, because they're talking about sibling sexual abuse. And so these adults who are now starting to come forward and talk about this, they still have the same concerns as if they were a little 8-year-old. My family's going to explode. I'm going to lose all these contacts, or something bad is going to happen to my parents. They're going to keel over or something if I tell them something. Maria, you wanted to make a point?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about those of us who didn't remember, because and why we didn't, we talk about why we didn't tell. Well, I didn't tell till I was 42, because that's when I remembered. And but in therapy is when I've gone back to, and I've heard myself say things in therapy that sound like my child talking,
Yeah.
like, oh, my mother wouldn't want to know, or, for whatever things that may have come out of my mouth and surprised me, because I really don't remember. So I can just kind of piece it together, like you're saying. I have to kind of go back as an adult and think
Mhm.
back. So, and just again, just for the people again who have no memory of it, that's common, and not
Mhm.
maybe not the majority, but it is common, and it's normal, and it's how our brains just protect us.
Yep.
And you know, that's what we're doing. So it's something that was horrific enough to us to either we didn't feel safe in the home, whatever it was really for our safety that we had to put this out of our minds.
Yep.
Not to say anything different for the people who remember. I mean, everybody's in the same situation, but some of us react in this way to the trauma. And yeah, I
There-
just want to make that point.
There's a bell curve of reaction to how people respond to trauma of any kind. Some people go very into themselves and they'll hold a memory, or and it'll go into the fog in the back. And then other people will, at the other end of the spectrum, they'll be right out there telling people about something that's happened. Less so when it comes to child abuse generally, and specifically sibling sexual abuse, but people respond to trauma in so many different ways that your message is very important for people to hear. And Liz, I know you had a thought, as did you, Gloria. So Liz, what did you want to?
Yeah, a couple of things really. I mean, we're talking about not having the words. As a child, you can't use the words. You don't know what it means. You don't
Yeah.
understand. But I think even when you become an adult and you know what sexual abuse is, you know what a sexual assault is, you know what rape is, you still cannot use those words in relation to what happened to you, or I couldn't anyway, because these horrible things happen to strangers, or they happen outside of the home. They don't happen in a safe environment. So you minimize it, and you sort of play it down to yourself. I disclosed to my parents when I was in my late 20s. They first of all sort of disregarded and acted like I hadn't said anything, but then they had to say it. But what I actually told them was so minimal, I couldn't speak to them, and part of that was pure shame. It wasn't so much about being accused of telling lies, because I wasn't known to be a liar. I didn't feel I wouldn't be believed, but I don't know whether I was trying to protect them or protect. I just couldn't find the words, and it's only now, 50 years later, that I've been able to use the words and not minimize it anymore, because now I've had to live and sit and with the consequences of what happened. But because it's in the family, that makes it harder to talk about and to describe it, because you're in a place of safety. My brother was meant to be looking after me. My parents were meant to create an environment where I was able to speak out and be safe. And I'm hoping that a lot of parents are listening to this, and the fact that if you're a parent listening to this, I applaud you for listening to this, because you're halfway there. You're more than halfway there. The fact that you've taken the time to listen, it's going to be very uncomfortable for you to hear some of this stuff, but thank you, because my parents didn't and wouldn't, and it's caused a lot of pain, not just to me, but to my husband, my children, and my two other brothers, because of the way it's been buried like this. So thank you for listening. If I don't get to speak again, because I know time's running on. My experience wasn't very good, but the fact that this is obviously going out there to parents is amazing. So act on your instinct and don't ignore it for all our sake.
Thank you for that, Liz. Gloria, I know you had something to say. You were
Yeah. Yes. I think what I'm feeling quite strongly is, and after working with survivors have noticed, when we first start to deal with the trauma, or when we are triggered by the trauma, we are not the adult you see sitting in front of you. We are that child at that age. And I think there needs to be permission given for parents and other supporters watching, that if someone discloses to you, they're actually right back there. So I know Maria mentioned, the languaging she used when she disclosed to her therapist. And I just want to say that's really common. and to be expected. So I guess I just wanted to add that as perhaps a little, just a little piece of information to tuck away, because sometimes survivors get asked, you know, they may have been 16, 18, 22 years of age and the abuse continued or happened again, and they get asked, well, why did you let that? You were old enough to know better. And again, circle back to, they become the age again. We become the age we were at that time. So I think it's really important that we recognise that. The other thing I just quickly wanted to say was, Phil was talking about the kind of the culture or the stigma around male survivors. And I just wanted to say 100% agree. The narrative is that men are meant to be strong protectors, and therefore nothing can happen that would ever harm them because it doesn't suit the narrative. And it's that toxic culture we've kind of grown up with and been conditioned to. And I think it's just important we recognise that our beautiful men were young boys who were vulnerable. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. I think one of the messages that I'm wanting people to hear from this conversation is that children experience a type of trauma when sibling sexual abuse is occurring. It is multifaceted, it is complicated, it can be very complex. And it can be, even in the most responsive environment, a long journey for children who have been abused. And if I might add, sometimes for the person causing the harm as well. A very long journey of guilt and shame. And that is all exacerbated if it's dismissed, denied, minimized, or even made grandiose, like made more than it really is, because sometimes you have parents who will exaggerate things. You know, it happens that sometimes that happens too, but more often than not, it's the idea of sibling sexual abuse, that it could even occur, is just denied. No, it doesn't happen, or it only happens in highly dysfunctional families with delinquent kids, which is completely wrong, and demonstrated over and over again in the research that any type of family, as noted on this call, and I could have another 20 people here, and they all come from different families, different parts of the world, different environments and all that. But the impacts are both large and small, even with intervention, for life. Ideally, a family can stay at some level intact, or in some ways, you know, communicative. Jane, you were talking about the fact that you still speak with your brother, and you have that kind of relationship. I speak with my middle brother, who wasn't involved in this, but I do not speak to my older brother, not because of the abuse itself, but because of his disregard for me as an adult. Like, he's just a jerk to me as an adult. So it's just like, nope, I don't care. Don't need to see it. It's not an important aspect of my life. Intervention and therapy and support as a whole family approach is a really important thing, and must be sought. I believe quite strongly that parents are not equipped to deal with this on their own. And before we hit the record button, we spoke sort of briefly about, you know, if you know it's going on, put the big girl pants on or the big boy pants on and reach out and get support. There's support in so many different places. And as parents, you have the right to that support as well. And I think it's important, and we would all agree that, you know, it's far better for a parent to recognize that this is occurring and not draw the shame onto themselves in such a way that they would not seek help. Because that often happens, right? It's like, oh no, I can't reach out, I can't get help, because then I look like a bad parent. Of course, there might be fears that your family would be split up, or that your children, or one of your children, or whatever, would be removed from the home. Of course, that would be a fear. But you got to get over that. You got to move forward. And I think we all agree that early intervention, or as soon as something is found out, parents take a next step. They take an action to seek help from somebody other than just their best girlfriend down the street, or, you know, like, or something like that, because that's not going to be very helpful. That's a really strong message I want to send out there. I know for myself, one of the things, there's little ways that I notice it in my life right now, and I've done therapy off and on for 40 years, but I know now, like, I still recognize hangovers from what happened to me, that I don't like sleeping in the house on my own. Not because, like, if somebody's going to break into my house, I'm going to get you. Don't you worry. If I hear you coming, I'm going to get you. But I used to wake up in the night and my brother would be standing there, and it would terrify me. And I am a heavy sleeper. So even now, things happen, like major thunderstorms or something like that, I sleep right through it. And a big concern about being in the house overnight on my own or something is that I'll wake up and somebody will be standing there. So that's a hangover of something like this. And I'm 60 years old. And so, I mean, I deal with it, obviously, but it's these can have these long-term, even these little nuances can have this long-term effect. Maria, you have a comment, and then we're going to
Yeah,
wrap up.
just real quick, just
Yeah.
because sometimes disclosure doesn't happen until we're an adult for
Yeah,
whatever
no,
reason.
quite
So
often. Yeah.
same thing. You know, we need to be believed. We need to be, you know, take action, positive action too. I mean, of course you want to do that when it's happening, and obviously, but even so,
Yeah.
there's still like this, the long-term impacts go on through the family forever until they're dealt with. So,
Yeah.
you know, still need that positive reaction.
Absolutely.
adult.
And you still need that intervention and support. There's family therapists who deal with
Exactly.
all adult family members, you know, and it doesn't just have to be for kids. And because when parents pass away, for example, even in my own family, I didn't have my older brother at my wedding because there was so much that was left undone, because he won't attend therapy, sort of thing. He won't discuss this. So he was just left out of the wedding. So even as adults,
Right.
there's ways that families can come together and be more intact than that.
Right.
You know,
And for what it's worth, I do speak to my brother now, and it's taken a lot of years, and he was kind enough to communicate with me. So we were able to do that even without formal therapy. We
Yeah,
could-
and that's
I wasn't a lot of therapy, but you know.
yeah, no, and that's great. And I'm glad that you've been able to create that relationship, and, you know, as adults, and find some healing there. So as we wrap up, and, you know, our time, I know we could talk for a really long time, but our time is a little bit limited, and perhaps we'll do this again and another time. But I'm going to quickly go around the room and just, what are your final thoughts as we wrap up this call? Phil, I'm going to start with you.
I would just say, going back to something that I think Gloria was talking about earlier, and other people touched on this as well, which is that, you know, when you, as an adult survivor, tell a parent about being abused by a sibling, they may look at you as, you know, however old you are when you're disclosing that, whether that's 30, 40, 50, or however old. You know, but I do think that it's important to emphasize and recognize that even though you are technically an adult, you still, you know, in that moment, want and need your parent to be that comforting, caring figure who will, you know, be at your side. And that's obviously not always the case, you know, when people disclose, because there's the shock and the guilt and the shame that a lot of parents feel. But I think that it's important to really emphasize that, you know, that they need that.
Great. Thank you, Phil. I appreciate that. Jane.
You know, I think that there's been a lot of information here, and I'm kind of losing track as to what was said before we were recording and where we weren't recording. I'm just hopeful that if you're a parent and you're listening to this, that you, first of all, that you see 7 survivors standing here before you, and we have clawed our way out, we have fought our way out, and we are highly functioning. I just firmly believe that if we talk to our kids and if we educate our kids, that we really can lessen the numbers, and we just don't want it to happen in the first place. Can we end it 100%? Probably not. But by Nancy hosting this platform and doing this today, hopefully next year it'll be bigger and wider, and we'll have more survivors on this call, and we'll lessen the numbers one at a time.
Great. Thank you, Jane. I agree with you. I think all the work that all of us are doing is contributing to the conversation being broader in society. So thank you for that. Carol.
I think there is life after abuse. There's life after being a victim. There's, in a way, there's a whole new life. It's a bit maybe chameleon. You shed a skin, you grow a new one, and it's a whole new life of being real and open and honest and truthful and leaving deceit and lies behind. And it's so much lighter. It's almost as if I'm living my life backwards, that as a child I was responsible and now I'm carefree in my 60s. So I think my message would be one of hope, that there is life. It's not the end of the world. We get the proper care, the proper support. Life can be great.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Carol. It's a strong message. Gloria.
Oh, I just love what Carol said. It's amazing. Look, I think there's this. What happened, the abuse does not need to define who that person was in your life. If you're a parent watching, doesn't need to define them. And sometimes, in spite of the trauma, people go on to thrive and survive, as Jane just pointed out before, and can be really highly functioning and successful. And in my case, even more the child now. So there you go.
Thank you, Gloria. Maria.
Yeah, I love what everybody said, and Carol, that was great. I wanted to say that we can heal. It can take time, but there's all this doom and gloom. Yes, it's a horrible thing that happened, and continues to happen throughout our lives, but we can heal, and we have to do work to get there. And with more support around us, and the whole community, the whole family, and all the community around us supporting us and not making it harder for us, it'll blossom from there.
That's great. A great message. Thank you, Maria. And Liz.
Yeah, I was thinking it's something that will probably never go away from any of us entirely. It can't, because it is part of who we are, because it happened when we were so young. But it can be managed, and the more you listen to your children and you are able to engage and act on this, the sooner you can do that, the easier it will be for everyone. The more honest your family will be, and the stronger your family will be, and you'll be protecting your children, whom you clearly love, because you're taking the trouble to watch this. You'll be helping them long after you've gone, and that's really important.
Yes, and just to my final message is sort of to echo that parents can contribute to the well-being of their children for the parents' entire lifespan.
Yeah.
So whether it's a child disclosing now, or you as a parent have a concern about your young children, take action, learn more. But I would send the same message to a 70-year-old whose 45-year-old is disclosed, or you've been sitting for the last 30 years with an inkling in the back of your head about something is amiss. It's okay to have conversations with your adult children as well, because you can be contributing to their healing. The emphasis of family is there when we talk about how sibling sexual abuse occurs, but it is also there when we talk about how sibling sexual abuse is healed, is the emphasis on the family. If possible, to emphasize the family and the contribution of the whole family in the family healing. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. This is a really important conversation, and I'm so pleased you were able to come from all parts of the world and all time zones and be a part of this conversation. I have no doubt that people listening will be taking away important messages from adult survivors who unfortunately know what they're talking about, and have a strong message, not only of prevention, but also of hope and healing and positive, a positive message for the future. So thank you, everyone, for being a part of today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, Nancy. Thanks.